Hi, this is Coulton. For today's episode, we're going to look at this book, Empire of Tea, written by three authors, Markman, Ellis, Richard Coulton, and Matthew Mauger. If you're interested in books on world history, do look at the description for the playlist. And with reference to this particular book, as the title states, Empire of Tea, it's about how this hot beverage, which was originally sourced from China and still is sourced from China, became the national drink of Britain. Now, of course, the first two chapters, the introductory chapters, provide the foundation of how tea plantations existed in China. There is a proper, a method of tea preparation and tea consumption in the 8th century, written by a Chinese scholar. And you take the 10th and 11th century in China, it slowly becomes more of a state monopoly. Tea begins to make entrance into several parts of Western Europe only after the trade begins to boom in the 16th and 17th century, and this is where the historical context and the entry of tea gets maximum importance. Now, in the late 19th century, I'm talking about the time period around 1680, 1690, and even if you take the early part of the 18th century, around 1710 or 1720, these 30 to 40 years, you clearly see that tea is an exotic drink, and when it gets introduced in Britain, people have a fascination for tea. There are question marks on how exactly this is cultivated, question marks on how exactly to brew it, because it has a bitter and sour taste. So how to brew it, and if you add sugar, are you going to spoil the taste? So tea has this, wonderful exotic flavor, and it was slightly different from alcohol. Alcohol is sedative, whereas tea is a stimulant, and it was thought that tea was predominantly a medicinal crop or medicinal plant. But as years progress, you come down to 1750. Because of increase in demand, naturally there is increase in supply. That is when you have the East India Company, transporting, the imports of tea in Britain, shoot up to double the time, 4 times what was it, around 1700. And within the 50 years, from 1700 to 1750, we see that tea kind of infiltrates all parts of the elites in Britain. And in the next 100 years, from 1750 to 1850, we see that it is infiltrating all the economic classes. And that is when tea becomes Britain's national drink. And if you look at the references which are made by the authors, and you find elaborate paintings, cartoons, and advertisements which are present in the book, you get examples on reference in poetry, reference in novels regarding tea. For example, having a cup of tea in the afternoon has a different meaning with reference to having a tea in the evening, and how tea is, having tea is something of a social gathering. And at the same time, you have certain poets and authors calling that it's a time for gossip. And you see that this reverence or this respect of tea changes over time. When the elites were consuming tea around 1740 and 1750, it is considered as a sociable, wonderful, pleasant drink. But by the time in 1850, after 100 years, when all the classes begin to consume tea, tea is pointed out as one of the corrupting factors which leads to poverty and unemployment. So you could see the change in artistry when they talk about the same commodity which is consumed by the rich and the poor. Not just this, you also get instances of tea being the most important smuggled commodity in Britain, around the 1770s, and hence in 1784 a Pitt's Act had to be introduced, to make sure that you provide more opportunities for legal bringing up of tea into Britain. And of course, the final chapters definitely talk about the decline of tea, how tea becomes more and more global, the natural reverence decreases. And today, if you take in terms of value and such, coffee is easily surpassing tea. Tea doesn't make even 50% of the total value of the market which we have. At the same time, post 1950s and 1960s, we clearly see that cool drinks and aerated drinks begin to dominate the use and through market, and the easily consumable beverages than the standard old method of having the leaves and then getting them to heat over a specific temperature in water, and then just separating out that particular beverage and not adding sugar, the old way of consuming. Now, it's not that all is well with the book. There are three major flaws which I would like to point out. If you look at the chapters, in certain chapters there is too much of specificity in terms of detailing, which might become dry, beyond a section of time. I found it under several chapters. For example, there is one chapter which talks about a mistake which was did by the father of taxonomy, Linnaeus, where he thought that tea was actually there are two different species of plants from which tea leaves are extracted, but technically tea leaves, the quality of tea leaves differ based on the climate and the soil in which you grow them. So, but even in that particular chapter, a lot of amount of time is spent on that single episode. And even if you look at novels and poetry and all the references and the historical context, the second flaw is that it is predominantly oriented in Britain. Even if the title says Empire of Tea, you expect a broader perspective of the global history of tea, but it's predominantly British, and you do not get, even if there are references on how tea cultivation from China, they want to reduce the imports of tea from China, and hence they found Assam in India, and within Assam itself, they found a wild variety of tea and they started tea plantations. But that historical segment is much restricted and it's predominantly British. That is the second problem. And the third and the most important flaw which I obtain is that this is made of blood. There is nothing about the suffering which this particular commodity released across the world. It's because of tea that you had more and more opium being transported from British India to China, which led to opium wars from 1839 to 1842. At the same time, it doesn't talk about the suffering or the slavery or bonded labor which was associated with tea plantations. So if you're looking at a text or a book which is predominantly oriented towards the British history of tea, then this is a text to go with it. But if you're looking at a global history or more of a holistic perspective, then this is not the book. This is more of a romanticized version of the national drink of Britain. That's it for now. Meet you with the next review soon.